Order, order. We can now get on to the next debate, and I'll call Mark Garnier to move the motion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chope, and I beg to move that this House consider the misuse of nitrous oxide. So nitrous oxide is a substance that has been available, as many people will know, for many years. Known more familiarly as laughing gas, it has been used by the medical profession for some time. And in its form, gas and air, it is used as a mild anaesthetic by both dentists and doctors. And I believe I first came across it myself, Mr. Chope, during the birth of my eldest son, when it was used to ease the pain of childbirth. Other uses include giving a bit of extra whoosh to drag racing engines, and nitrous oxide systems designed to boost power outputs are used for competitive motor events. And of course, it's used in catering for both frothing whipped cream and frothing coffee in home appliances, more usually found outside the UK. In this form, it's sold in 8-gram mini cylinders. But Mr. Chope, nitrous oxide is being increasingly used for recreational highs. Back in my day, solvent abuse was a problem. Today, nitrous oxide, NOS, whippets, hippie crack, balloons, call it what you like, is being used for short-term highs by a new generation. It may be referred to as laughing gas, but in reality, it's no more glamorous than glue sniffing. And this is not a new phenomenon. The Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 lists specific substances that are illegal. Nitrous oxide is not listed there, but it is covered by the Psychoactive Substance Act 2016. And this act, whilst not listing specific substances, covers those that fit specific characteristics and definitions. To fall within the remit of this act, the substance must be capable of having a psychoactive effect, which affects a person's mental functioning or emotional state by stimulating or depressing the nervous system. Specifically, this would include effects that we associate with controlled drugs under the 1971 Act, such as hallucinations, changes of alertness, changes of perception of time and space, changes of mood and empathy with others, and drowsiness. The wide definition under this Act intends to preempt new substances emerging into the drugs market by defining their effects as opposed to their chemical structure. And the Act is good news. It makes it an offence to produce, supply, offer to supply, or possess with intent to supply any psychoactive substance with a maximum penalty of 7 years imprisonment. And in short, it makes it illegal to sell nitrous oxide for recreational use. Data available tells us there were 152 convictions in 2017, 107 in 2018, 52 in 2019 under that Act. But we are trying to find out more recent data. Slightly alarmingly, though, the West Midlands Police got in touch with me only this morning to tell me that since 2015, they have only prosecuted 4 people under the 2016 Act. But Mr. Chair, the Act was formally reviewed in 2018, and the review concluded that usage does not appear to have been affected by the Act, with use by adults increasing to around 2.3% of the adult population, whilst use by 16 to 24-year-olds is steady at just under 9%. Indeed, it's now the second most commonly used drugs amongst that age group, coming a close second to cannabis. But the data is old, as I say. Anecdotal evidence from the medical profession in the West Midlands suggests that usage is increasingly marked since lockdown. And the reason the medical profession is picking this up is because of the appalling side effects it has on its users. Its attractiveness is that it's easy to use. Historically available in small 8-gram cylinders, these mini cylinders, it's inhaled using commonly a balloon. Its effects are immediate and include euphoria, giggling, distortion of sound and hallucinations. These peak after 20 seconds and resolve after a couple of minutes. It is a quick high and leaves no immediate after effects. Someone using this once would be able to sit down with, for example, their parents, with no evidence that they had been using it only minutes before. It seems nothing in this, there's nothing that appears, it appears something that appears harmless. But that is, Mr. Chope, not the case. The reality is that people use it not just once, for long periods of times. While using it to be available, whilst it used to be available in small 8-gram mini canisters, similar in size to those of sparklet bulbs, more familiar. Yes, by all means.
Thank you so much for securing this really important debate and for making such a significant and poignant speech on this matter. I find this very distressing to know that young people are able to access these silver cylinders and the harmful reaction this is having on them. And within my constituents, I've seen pockets of these cylinders in various places, and I'm really pleased that he's brought this to the government's attention. Does he agree with me that we need more work to be done with health and education, as well as with the enforcement, to make sure that young people are not able to purchase this?
Garnier.
I completely agree, and I'll be coming to a lot of this in my speech, but her point is absolutely right. With any legislation, part of that has to be to do with education. And it's really important, I think, that people recognise that this is an insidious sort of high. It's not without consequences. And the fact that it's called laughing gas, I think people would agree, means that it trivialises it, when in fact it's not a trivial thing. Yes,
I'm really interested in the speech that he's making and in the harms that he's raising from nitrous oxide. As somebody whose lung was punctured as a result of using nitrous oxide during childbirth, wow. I would be very keen for what he's saying about education to be at the heart of the proposals that he's making in terms of telling people these are the very real dangers that you face if you misuse nitrous oxide. And the only reason that I came through it safely was because I was doing it in a medical setting with medical professionals who could look after me.
Garnier.
That is an incredibly alarming story, because at the end of the day it's being prescribed by somebody who knows, by an anaesthetist presumably, who knows exactly what they're doing, and that's coming in the form of gas and air. Actually, what's being used by people who misuse this drug is they're doing it neat, which is much more powerful and much more dangerous. But what is used to be something that required some efforts to transfer smallish amounts from a canister to a balloon so that you can use it in this simple way is now something that can be inhaled all evening, sucking in huge quantities of nitrous oxide, because it's now available, rather than these 8-gram canisters, typically in canisters of up to 600 grams, which allows you to just sit there using it all night. The result is that doctors are now seeing an increase in cases of people being admitted to hospital with serious side effects. Dr. David Nicol, who's a campaigner in my region, in the West Midlands, a local doctor and a significant campaigner, tells me that at least he sees one new case of every fortnight. Misuse of nitrous oxide creates a vitamin B12 deficiency, and this is a vitamin vital for nerve function for both periphery in hands and feet and within the spinal cord. Practical effects are numbness of the hands and feet, pins and needles, but longer-term use results in people being unable to walk, being unable to talk properly, relying on crutches, and in some cases wheelchairs for, potentially, the rest of their lives. Yes, by all means.
I want to also add my thanks to my right honourable friend, who's also a Member of Parliament in Worcestershire, and I've obviously canvassed my local police force to understand the impacts on my constituency, as he's done. And is he aware also that, as well as the health impacts that he's discussing, there is also impacts of anaemia seen in some users? And does he also agree with me then that this is a matter of resources for our NHS? We all know in Worcestershire we have problems with our NHS, our acute trust, so surely we should be educating people to not engage in optional activity it's burdening an already overstretched trust.
I completely agree, and my friend honourable friend will be delighted to hear that I spoke with our local police and crime commissioner only this morning about this, and this is something which actually I have engaged with him over a number of weeks, and he is acutely aware of this, but there are problems.
Very grateful to my honourable friend. And on the issue of crime, my constituents in Worcester have been inundated with concerns about Aswood Cemetery and vandalism and theft from graves taking place. One of the constituents who came to see me about this, Mrs Macaulay, mentioned that the ground around the graves was littered with these gas canisters. Is he concerned as well about the behavioural effect of people taking these short-term highs and then perhaps carrying out foolish and stupid activities which can be deeply hurtful to people when it becomes something like that, desecrating a grave in a churchyard?
Honourable friend's absolutely right. I mean, desecrating a grave is appalling, but the last time I saw a pile of empty NOS canisters was outside the Royal Institution in Carlton House Terrace, which is a slightly unexpected place to see it, and I'm sure the members were not using it themselves, but somebody else was. But my friend's absolutely right. This brings about behaviour which, whilst at the time for the person who's being affected by it may seem highly amusing, but the effects of it long-term for other people around them is incredibly profound. I'll come to that a little bit later in my speech. I think but the important point is that something that is used for beneficial medical outcomes, although not necessarily always without risk, by trained medical professions is being misused to the level that it will destroy people's lives and those around them. So how is it becoming so prevalent? The reality is, Mr. Chope, that there seems to be no one really controlling the selling of it. It seems that the Act is being ignored at worst, but at best very, very difficult to enforce. Users say that it is incredibly easy to get hold of, freely available in corner shops. Moreover, it seems to be getting cheaper, whilst everything else is getting more expensive. The 600-gram canister that I mentioned a little bit earlier has now dropped from £50 a canister to just £25 a canister, bucking the trend of cost of living crisis, it seems. And for communities that tend to avoid alcohol, it's an apparently guilt-free alternative. But it is this availability that is extraordinary. Bear in mind this is being used as a psychoactive drug and therefore controlled by the 2016 Act. But, Mr. Chair, you can Google this, should you choose to, and there are websites that nominally sell nitrous oxide as a whipping cream additive, brazenly giving advice on its psychoactive effects and its legality or otherwise as a recreational drug. And there's even one website that offers vitamin B12 supplements in order to counteract the effect of it at the same time. More alarmingly, one website that I looked at offers nitrous oxides not just in quantities for personal use, and you can buy 6 600-gram canisters for an attractive £135, you'll be pleased to hear, Mr. Chair. It also offers quantities by the pallet load. You can get 72 cases of canisters, will cost you an impressive £8,150, which they will deliver to your door. And remember that this is a website that starts off by talking about this as a whipped cream additive, but quickly goes on to its misuse. That's either an awful lot of whipped cream, or importantly, I think this seems to be a wholesaler of misery for any number of different people. Yes, by all means.
Very grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful to him for bringing this debate to the House. This is a constituency issue that of great concern to me, its use in the community and the litter that comes from the canisters itself. I too met with my Police and Crime Commissioner this morning, and this was one of the discussions that we had. My Police and Crime Commissioner has concern about the impact on people driving following the use of these canisters. I wonder if he would be able to comment on that.
Garnier.
Absolutely. I mean, there is definite evidence that people have been killed driving under the influence of this. It's one of these peculiar ones where although it takes 20 seconds to kick in and after a couple of minutes it resolves itself, what we don't necessarily know is what the long-term effects are on people's acuity and ability to be able to drive. And I suspect if you've been taking this stuff all evening and you then get in your car, even if you have come off the immediate high, then surely it's going to have some longer-term effect on your ability to be able to check traffic lights and all the rest of it. But getting back to this website, which I was referring to, in every sense, as I say, it looks like a wholesaler of illegal drugs under the 2016 Act. And importantly, the bottles that it's being offered in suit neither the catering industry nor the medical profession. And the medical profession buys it in very large quantities for obviously the kind of important use that it uses it. So these can only be being made for misuse. So back in 2015, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs provided advice on both the harms of nitrous oxide and public health safety. It concluded that its harmfulness, whilst not warranting control under the 1971 Misuse Act, was obviously important to come under that 2016 Act. But back in September last year, and thanks to the trade association that covers the legitimate use of nitrous oxide, which is the British Compressed Gases Association, the Home Secretary wrote to the Advisory Council asking them to review their finding. In her letter, she cited statistics showing that 550,000 16 to 24-year-olds are using nitrous oxides in the previous 12 months, a significant use. And this advice would inform the government's decision on whether nitrous oxides should be controlled under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act due to the long-term effects that its misuse can have. So, in theory, quite a good move forward. I understand, however, that the Home Office is still waiting for a reply, and I'd be grateful for the Minister if he could confirm what progress the Home Office has made in chasing up a response on this. I've learned that from the Compressed Gases Association that they've raised this again with the current Home Secretary, and she too has written seeking guidance from the organisation in concern. So I gather the Home Office is onto this, but it seems to be taking some time to get a response back. But Mr. Chope, this issue was brought to my attention by the brilliant campaign, frankly, being run by BBC Hereford and Worcester and my local radio station. And they've been working hard with local campaigner Dr. David Nichols, as I say, who I've already referred to. But it's not just David and the BBC Hereford and Worcester who are onto this. Not only have we a petition in Parliament that has achieved over 11,000 signatures, but the European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Drug Addiction published a report on Monday just this week. This highlights all the points raised here and more. 7 case studies are listed in the report from Denmark, Ireland, France, Lithuania, Netherlands, Portugal and the UK. This report absolutely reinforces the concerns raised by Dr. Nicholl and BBC Hereford and Worcester and my honourable colleagues and friends here. Yes, Dominic.
Would he agree at a time when the BBC appears to be considering cutting back on local radio? This is an excellent example of the public service and duty that our local radio provides, and that they should really reconsider their decision to target local radio for their cuts.
Garnier.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I'm going to come to that. But now my honourable friend, the member for Worcester, has raised this. He is absolutely right. At every level, local radio is fantastic. And he and I both know what it's like trying to get around Worcestershire when you've got flooding coming in. And were it not for BBC Hereford and Worcester providing that brilliant support, like other radio stations do, then we wouldn't have got the help. So absolutely brilliant point to raise. Getting back to the issue. Moreover, all of this reinforced the call by the British Compressed Gas Association that consumer sales should be banned in the UK. And this advice has been followed by the Netherlands, who will be introducing a ban from January next year. It seems that anybody who knows anything about this is keen to tackle this problem, but there seems to be a problem with the government and its agencies. But with all this official information, it is something more meaningful, I believe, to hear the views of those who have been affected by this. And I received an email in anticipation of this debate just earlier this week, and I think it's just worth reading this out in full. Around 5 years ago, I found that my brother had become addicted to nitrous oxide. He had been introduced to it as a party drug by a friend at university, but soon became heavily reliant on it, to the point where he would do it all day, every day. Unfortunately, it turned him from a really kind, intelligent, outgoing and sociable person to a depressed recluse. He developed psychosis, suffered from hallucinations, and became confused. In one instance, he was convinced that I was impersonating his sister. He subsequently became violent towards my parents and me, and one Christmas tried to kill my father by repeatedly bashing his head with a portable speaker. We were all terrified of him. His nitrous oxide abuse led to him drinking alcohol heavily and gambling, and 2 years after we learned of his addiction, he took his own life at the age of 25. I am so angry that somebody who had so much potential, he was an elite athlete, had won scholarships to a top university in the USA, and had just started a great job in finance, had his life destroyed by a drug which many still consider harmless. We really need greater awareness of the harmfulness of this drug, especially amongst young people. Despite how damaging it can be, you also know that it is freely available with no checks available. Indeed, my brother was able to purchase boxes of it on Amazon with next-day prime delivery, and it was being openly sold by a shop around the corner from where we were living. We all know that drug use is not free from consequences. They vary from misery for the users to misery for all of those people, family and loved ones, around those who have become addicted. But if we agree that nitrous oxide is a drug under the 2016 Act, how on earth is it possible that Amazon can be delivering large quantities of this and corner shops are selling it to kids? How is it possible that I can go to a freely available website that not only offers it by the pallet load, but provides advice about how to use it as a recreational high? How is it possible that the police are apparently not able to tackle this? As I say, although my PCC is definitely onto it, but it is a problem for them. But why is... Yes, Dominic.
Just allow me very briefly, because I thank him so much for highlighting that awful case, and our hearts obviously go out to the family of those affected. But the suggestion from Inspector Richfield, my local police lead, is he's making the point that it's very difficult to ban the sale of these sorts of things because, as he's so rightly pointed out, they're so easily available on Amazon, on eBay, and so on. What the police are suggesting is, could it be made illegal to have possession of this in a public place if you're under 16? What does he think of that idea? And I hope that the Minister has also noted that and can come to that in his final remarks.
Well, I think
Garnier.
so. My answer to you is exactly. Sorry, to my honourable friend is exactly that. I think the Minister, who I have already spoken to about this, and I know is very open to ideas. So perhaps we could have some thoughts on that when he makes his response. But I think also importantly with all of this is why are we still waiting for an answer to the Home Secretary's to two Home Secretaries' requests for more information from the Advisory Council on the misuse of drugs, and this is actually where a lot of these answers can come from. Mr. Chair, I'm very grateful to the Minister for his time, and I look forward to hearing what plans he has to deal with this apparent 21st century version of glue-smithing. We've already heard of the tragic consequences of somebody who became addicted to this, and the Minister potentially has it in his own hands, the ability to prevent further unnecessary misery. But again, finally, can I just congratulate the work being done by David Nicholl and BBC Hereford and Worcester. As we've already heard, the BBC are introducing changes to local broadcasting that flies in the face of all logic. and the work done by local radio stations. And I'm sorry to end on this point, which is slightly unrelated to the major part of this debate. But the work done by local radio stations is so important, and this is such a good example of it. But Mr. Chope, thank you very much.
The question is that this House has considered the misuse of nitrous oxide. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It is a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship. Let me start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Wyre Forest, for securing this important debate. And let me start also by putting on record my thanks to his local radio station, BBC Hereford and Worcester, for their tireless and very energetic campaigning and investigative journalism in this area. As the honourable member said, work by local radio stations such as BBC Hereford and Worcester is extremely important in raising these issues and drawing them to the attention of local members of Parliament, such as those present here today, and through them, Parliament and the Government. The Government does share the concerns that honourable and right honourable members have raised this morning about the use of nitrous oxide. We are very conscious, as the honourable member said, about its apparently growing levels of use recreationally, and particularly by younger people, as the member for Wyre Forest said, aged between 16 and 24 in particular. We are concerned about the effect it has on people's physical and mental well-being. Often drug consumption can have effects that take quite a long time to manifest themselves. For example, long-term cannabis consumption, we know, can lead to psychosis and psychotic episodes, but it takes quite a long time for that to be manifested. So with any sort of psychoactive substance, there can be effects that are not immediately obvious, and only after the passage of some time does it become clear. Of course, I give way.
Would he speak to his counterpart in the Department of Health about maybe running a public health campaign just to raise awareness about the effects of this drug?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is quite right to point to the need to elevate public awareness. All too often we find people make an assumption, as here, that something on the face of it appears relatively innocuous, but in fact, either over time can have a serious effect, like cannabis and psychosis, or indeed, if consumed in excessive quantities. And the point the Honourable Member for Wyre Forest made about very large canisters is concerning. And at the point the Honourable Lady just made, that when people can end up getting paralysed by consuming huge amounts of this stuff, that is deeply concerning. So I think I will undertake to write to my colleagues in the Department of Health, conveying exactly the suggestion that she made a second ago. I think it's a good idea. It may also be worth raising herself directly with health ministers, but I will certainly, through OPQs or otherwise, but I will certainly write on the point as she requested a moment ago. Yes.
Thank you so much. I mean, that is absolutely, I believe, the right thing to do and the right suggestion through health. But with this campaign, could you also speak to your education counterparts as well to make sure that there is that connection between health and education so that young people are really getting and receiving this information early?
See, my job list is growing with every passing minute of this debate. Yes, I am happy to raise that with Department for Education colleagues. Education is important so young people do understand the risks they are running when they take this particular drug, nitrous oxide. We support, in the context of education, we support an organisation called Every Mind Matters, which is an online resilience-building resource aimed particularly at 11 to 16-year-olds to provide information to them so they can make informed choices. And obviously raising concerns about this sort of thing is important. They obviously get taught in schools through relationships, sex and health education, RSHE, teaching, which became compulsory in schools from September of 2020. So there is a sort of part of the curriculum specifically set aside for messaging of the kind that the Honourable Lady quite rightly pointed to a moment ago. Let me just turn to one or two of the questions raised by the member for Wyre Forest, but also I think the member for Redditch, and I think the member for Worcester may have touched on this as well. And that is the legal framework and where we are with that. As the member moving the debate, the member for Wyre Forest said, nitrous oxide is currently controlled under the Psychoactive Substances Act 2016 rather than the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. And as he said, there are provisions in the Psychoactive Substances Act which control the supply of this, but do not criminalise possession. It is an offence to supply nitrous oxide if the person supplying it knows or is reckless as to whether it will be used for its psychoactive effect. So there is a legal duty on the supplier not to act recklessly in supplying it. Now, I was very interested by the example that the member for Wyre Forest gave around this, I think, an online company who were, in his words, he says, acting as a wholesaler of this drug. He thinks not for legitimate purposes to do with whipped cream or other related commercial applications, but for use in a psychoactive context. And he says that the website sells it in forms of packaging that would appear to suggest it might be used for psychoactive effect, and it has content on its website pointing in the same direction, including suggesting you can take vitamin B12 supplements to counter the effect that nitrous oxide has in that regard, all of which he suggested in his speech pointed to the fact that perhaps they are supplying it for that purpose and not for legitimate commercial purposes. Now, were that the case, I haven't obviously seen the website, but were that the case, it would strike me that that probably would be reckless, that the company acting in the way he describes would be acting recklessly as to whether or not it's being used for psychoactive effect. In fact, in some ways, they might even be implicitly encouraging it with the content he describes. So I think he would have a case to refer that website to the police, drawing their attention to the provisions that I just pointed to. And there might be grounds for investigation and prosecution under the law as it stands today for the reasons that I just set out. Of course, I give way.
I'm very grateful for him making that clear, and I think he's absolutely right. Where there is concern about these things, the website should be referred. I've come across similar cases in relation to even more dangerous substances, and he will know some of the debates we've had previously about DNP, which is a highly toxic and deadly substance, sometimes missold as a slimming or exercise supplement. Would he agree that we do need stronger powers to ensure that we can take action against websites that do that? Because I'm concerned that I've seen cases of that for myself. I've had them raised with me by constituents where drugs that can literally kill people just simply through being ingested are being mismarketed or marketed in the way that my honourable friend referred to, where it explicitly says this is not the use for it, but then goes on to imply that, of course, you could buy it and use it for all those things. That is very, very dangerous, and particularly with the young people to who these things are targeted. Can I urge him to take more action?
How long do I have? 2 3 minutes. Yes, I think that's a very important point. Look, I mean, where the substance concerned has a psychoactive effect, then it will fall under the Psychoactive Substances Act 2016. And where people are supplying it recklessly in the way that the member for Worcester just described, then there is basis for action. If it does not have psychoactive effect, but might have some other adverse medical effect, I think that will obviously not fall within the purview of the Psychoactive Substances Act. But obviously, such substances are regulated separately via the MRHA and other regulators who can, of course, make regulations to restrict supply. And I think if there is evidence that there is misuse of substances that are legal, then either tightening that regulation or having them reviewed by the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs is the right way to go. And if there are particular examples he has, if he wants to write to me with them, I would be very, very happy to take those up. And I'm conscious that time is probably pressing upon us.
Well, it's always pressing.
Yes. Time does always press.
Well, if the minister's asking a question, this debate can go on until 11:30, but not beyond.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, Christopher. That was the clarification I was seeking, besides his more metaphysical point about the pressing nature of time in general. I wanted to just turn to the questions around the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs. As the member for Wyre Forest very both eloquently and accurately put it in his speech, this matter was referred to the ACMD by the Home Secretary in September of last year, so 12 or 13 months ago. We have not yet received their report. The Home Office has obviously raised the matter. It is worth saying they are independent of government, so we can't compel them. But I think following this debate, we could certainly, I think it would be proper to draw their attention to the fact this debate has been held and the concerns on both sides of the House have been expressed around this, and just to make sure they're aware of the very strong parliamentary interest in this matter, and that would be a proper and reasonable thing to do without obviously trespassing on their independence. I think I do agree with the honourable member for Wyre Forest that this does need urgently looking at. The government do follow the advice generally. We're not obliged to, but we do generally follow the advice of the ACMD because they are medical experts, and it is within their power to make a recommendation around how this drug should be classified. And if they were to give advice, they thought it was sufficiently damaging, it would then be open to the government, obviously, to reclassify it and bring it within the remit, not of the Psychoactive Drugs Act 2016, but the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, at which point it would become a prohibited drug, and obviously it would fall into a particular class, A, B, or C. But the government does take their recommendations very, very seriously because they are expert in this area.
Would he enlighten the House for the benefit of those of us not quite familiar with the role of this body? Do those recommendations include providing additional changes to the law, legal frameworks such as making it illegal to possess these substances in a public place, as I referred to earlier? And how can this be enforced based on those recommendations? I think that's what we would like to know.
So they make, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, I think principally makes recommendations about whether a particular drug, how harmful a particular drug is, and therefore how it should be classified under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. That is the advice I think we've sought in this particular case. The consequences that then flow from classification, I think, are matters, obviously, for Parliament to legislate, and that is set out in law, and obviously there are different criminal penalties depending on whether it's in Class A, Class B, or Class C, and there are different penalties for possession versus supply. So the advice we're seeking is essentially medical advice on just how damaging these drugs are, and therefore which regime they should fall within. So anyway, I will convey to the ACMD on behalf of the members here today how pressing members of Parliament feel this issue is. Quite rightly, I think the points raised have been very powerful and very well articulated. So I will undertake a third action to go and do that because it is an important issue. We are concerned about this. The only other point I would add, Sir Christopher, before closing, concerns powers which local authorities have. Now, I think one or two members have made the point that there are sort of antisocial behaviour associated with this, littering associated with this. And there are powers available under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 and other legislation to make various forms of order in this area, including orders concerning antisocial behaviour and dispersal. And we also have public space protection orders, which are available to local councils to stop individuals or groups committing antisocial behaviour in a public space. And I think this would clearly fall into, this sort of behaviour would fall into the remit of that. So following consultation by councils with the police or the local PCC, they can issue a PSPO, which would effectively prevent these activities taking place in a particular area. So I would just suggest, if there are members who feel there's a problem in a particular location, to get their local council to use these PSPOs as an immediate measure and way of taking action in this area. But I thank the member for Wye Valley, Christopher, for the opportunity to speak on this important issue.
The question is that this House has considered the misuse of nitrous oxide. As many opinions, aye? Aye. Contrary, no? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.